Welcome. This is part 3 of the text of terror, the misapplication of text to homosexuality from the biblical tradition. The last 2 we've been dealing strictly with the Hebrew scriptures. Today I want to deal with Paul and his translations or our mistranslations of words that he's used. In 1 Corinthians 6:9, Paul says, "Do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Fornicators, adulterers, male prostitutes, sodomites, thieves, the greedy, the drunkards, revilers, robbers, and none of these will inherit the kingdom of God." There's a real issue here with the translation of these terms. The first is malakoi. It is the Greek word meaning luxuriant or soft. And the second is arsenokoitos, a word that we really don't understand the full understanding of what that word meant. It seems to be indicating that these 2 words are translated, for instance, in the Jerusalem Bible as catamites and sodomites, the passive and active members of male intercourse. The New English Bible allies these 2 words together, those who are guilty of homosexual perversion. The New American Bible says sodomites. The New Revised Standard says male prostitutes and sodomites. And the New International Version says male prostitutes and homosexual offenders. This text has been used to justify social policy from such things as opposing same-sex marriage, for instance, in the support of Prop 8 defining marriage as one man, one woman, to discriminations against gays and lesbians, to the point that violence is often done to gays and lesbians as targeted because religion justifies it. We have problems with this because these are mistranslations. I want to call attention. Dale Martin, professor of New Testament studies who's written several books on Paul, looked at the word malakoi and found its usage in Hellenistic intertestamental novellas to indicate that malakoi were males, effeminate males, who loved to brush their long hair, polish themselves with all sorts of perfumes, and they were addicted to sex, but addicted to the opposite sex. The second word is far more problematic, arsenokoitos. One of my New Testament friends translates that as couch potato. It literally means bed male. Oftentimes it's been understood to be prostitute. Certainly it may be some sort of word, but it only appears twice in the biblical tradition and a couple of times in lists in the intertestamental literature that seems to be a list of vices that are involved with economic exploitation. That may be a clue. It also appears in the writings of Hippolytus when he talks about how Zeus took Ganymede to make him his arsenokoitoi, and certainly that the devil has tried to do the same with Adam. And if we go back to the myth of Zeus and Ganymede, Ganymede was the youth that Zeus kidnapped from Crete, raped him, and made him his cupbearer. So again, it's non-consensual sex. So also, it may be a problem for Paul's community, and the most likely interpretation, because some have seen this as pederastic relationships. I don't think it's pederasty. But I do think it is non-consensual sex between master and slave. This was a problem for Paul's communities because many folks who converted to the Christian movement were slaves. How could they, in good conscience, be slaves and yet subject to the sexual whims of their masters? So if this is the case, both terms have been mistranslated and used to justify policies and violence, social violence, targeted at gays and lesbians. Again, mistranslation. And that's the problem we have with those folks who quote these texts to us, that they do not study the Greek, they do not study the literature, and they don't study the scholars. Most scholars behind this, like Dale Martin, Bernadette Bruton at Brandeis University, and Marty Nissenden in his book Homoeroticism in the Biblical World, have argued that these words are not applicable to the concept of homosexuality in the 21st century. I want to ask a question, a very interesting question about Paul's life. Bishop Spong, in one of his popular books, suggested that the thorn in Paul's flesh is the apostle's own attraction to same sex. And it's based on German biblical scholarship of a very reputable and very good German biblical scholar, Geert Tyson. And if you study Geert Tyson's book, there's a couple of footnotes also going to other German biblical scholars arguing that Paul is what we would call a closeted homosexual. But to use that term is an anachronism because Paul in the ancient world neither had a closet or the word homosexual. But it may mean that Paul was attracted to the same sex. Someone had talked about Paul's thorn of flesh as having to do with failing eyesight, some with other sort of ailments such as seizures and so on. I choose to say that it might be his attraction to the same sex. There was an article in the 1950s done by a psychoanalyst who seemed to have some biblical savvy, and he analyzed Paul and his relations to men. He found that Paul has a problem with authority with older males. Paul likes to have associated around him younger males, Timothy and Titus. Paul's misogyny, and we know that where there's misogyny, there's frequently homophobia. And we may say that there may even be a linkage between internalized homophobia and Paul's own feelings. However, if that's the case, that Paul was attracted to same sex, I think we can look at one of the issues in a very positive way, how Paul dealt with his own sexual attractions. I think his fear of sex with other men may have led him to really sublimate his sexual drives. But he sublimated into a relationship with Christ. And that Christ became the main affection for Paul. He was attracted to Christ. And this insight came out for me when I was a Roman Catholic seminarian, when I realized that what we would call the Pauline closet was the prototype of the Catholic priest closet. That we were told to sublimate our sexual desires, but to transfer them directly to Christ. And we can see that intimacy that Paul had with Christ when he says, "It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me."